Doug, how are you?
I'm great, Ryan. Thanks for having me here.
I'm looking forward to diving into your background and talking about sales and growth. A lot of stuff that a lot of people care about, right? And hopefully we'll bring some intentionality to it. And your background is going to speak for itself as far as like why we can do some of the things that we can do. So for the audience, Doug, just give us the 30,000 foot overview, and then we'll go back and unpack a bunch of the parts of it.
Yeah, I began working at the age of 3 for my father's business. I swept floors for 25 cents a week, and I loved it. And by the age of 5 or 6 or so, we were placed out in front of clients and helping them write orders and do all that stuff. So I was learning kind of the skill sets. My mother was actually a very successful Avon lady in the 70s and late 60s, 70s, as well as a nurse. So I used to travel with her, and I loved when she would count up her commissions right at the end. So I kind of got the bug early on. I've built, funded, or have succeeded or crashed and burned in about 35 companies at this point, helping others as well as myself. Today, I generally serve helping people and companies, sell into the, like the 1% of all salespeople and sales teams globally.
And when you say the 1%, you're talking about the 1% of desired companies to sell into, or are you talking about the top performers?
The top performers. Yeah, the top performers. Because sales is a communications business more so than anything. So really the industry is not a factor. It's more of, how do you train the person and get them to be able to be top performers.
So let's talk about, and I'm super fascinated in this whole sales and marketing conversation. I grew up in a copier world, right? So it was the smiling and dialing, and I'm sure you've had your fair share of bump-ins or whatever exposure to the Xerox world and the IBM world, right? Where a lot of the suits were manufactured out of.
Absolutely, as well as having worked with companies that do laser cartridges and different things in that industry. So yes,
Caton, the remanufactured toner.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So let's start, Doug. I'd coming from your perspective, and then we can talk about the different types of companies, what equals success for the types of people, and honestly, even as strategies have shifted, but setting some groundwork, Doug, is I had this woman on the show recently, Jennifer Zick, who was a fractional CMO, and we kind of talked about specifically marketing, but how the merge of sales and marketing, where does it start and stop, and then how it's different when you're B2B, B2C types of companies that you're reaching after. So maybe kind of give us some of your perspective of where does sales and marketing start and stop, and the different approaches that people would have, maybe B2B, B2C, and then where you fit inside of that.
Yeah, I think, here's the thing that I've always, from experience, I found that when we integrate marketing and sales, it's really about the customer journey, right? So it's really not fractionalized into marketing. It's not fractionalized into sales if we really want to optimize it. Mm-hmm. Because, customer service can be one of your best sales divisions in the company if you work it that way. Mm-hmm. So really marketing and sales to me, even though they're separate functions and I intellectually understand that, I like to look at it as it's a customer journey from beginning to end. So if marketing is starting that journey, the congruency of the messaging needs to be consistent all the way through. Otherwise, it's kind of like taking an airplane ride and everything's going fine, and all of a sudden turbulence kicks in, and it's like, whoa, that doesn't make you feel warm and fuzzy about the airline company at that point, nor the plane that you're riding in. You're just hoping you get through it. So when things are aligned like that, and whether it's B2B or B2C, that alignment is actually going to help companies do a few things. One, they're going to convert better. 2, they're going to convert faster. And 3, they're going to have higher profitability. So, I believe, and just based on, doing all of this for so many years, that when we align the pieces in one unified system to sell something and then generate an expansion on the sale on the back end, that is really, a seamless process when it's done right.
Well, and I'm looking forward to unpacking this process. But like, before we do, like, what in out of the 35 companies that you've been a part of, or like, I mean, I know well, what's the total number of aggregate sales that you've helped participate in, 2 billion or something like that? Like, what has worked, and what are some of the key, takeaways along your journey that have led you into your thought process today?
A lot of mistakes.
Tuition payments, right?
Tons of them. I mean, I have I have over 600 million in sales that I can account for. And then working with companies and teams, it goes much higher than that. And, what I realized is mistakes aren't a problem as long as we don't continuously focus on trying to fix the problem. But if we fix the cause of the mistake, then all of a sudden the problem never exists again, right? So,
Hmm.
I've certainly had my share of successes and, oh, that worked great. I've also had the other side where it's like, okay, that didn't work as good as we thought it was going to work. All right, how do we make up that ground? And, how do we overcome or play win-win with that process? And to me, it's a constant learning process. I mean, I've worked with, multi-billion-dollar corporations. I've worked with mom and pop organizations. I've worked with solo entrepreneurs, and I've worked anywhere in between. And what I find is it's a constant state of never-ending growth,
Hmm.
because once you get to a certain level, it's like, oh, okay, we got another thing we have to deal with. So I find the mistakes are as valuable as the actual wins, because we learn probably more from the mistakes than we do from the wins, because we go, oh, that was great, we won, we'll duplicate it again. But what happens when we duplicate it 2 more times and it doesn't work anymore?
Hmm.
All right. And so now we got to figure out, oh, well, was it the market conditions? Was it whatever it might have been?
Hmm.
And, that's the interesting part of business in general. It's a never ending process.
So what I think is interesting about your background that you mentioned that is important to understand about sales is selling for a multi-billion-dollar organization, whether it's a $2 million ERP implementation versus a mom and pop shop that's going out there and selling who knows what it is, right? Whether it's
Right.
retail or whether it's assisted living facility, that's a small one. I'm just thinking of just random stuff
Right.
like you
Sure.
said, it's a customer journey. So, like, what does success look like in sales? With the customer journey, you said it was a communication strategy. So, like, what would you define as a good, successful sales strategy, and how do you want to unpack this?
Okay. So there's a lot in that,
Just give us the silver bullet, Doug, of all perfect sales stuff immediately.
well, it's always about playing win-win and keeping a rapport really high through the process. So, and what I mean by win-win is, are we actually doing the right thing by the client, by the potential buyer? Now, whether that is, hey, we're selling flowers in a florist,
Hmm.
right? And it's you know, or it is, we're selling ERP system. Believe it or not, I know what that is. I also know what extruders are too, because I worked in that industry. So it's you're dealing with people, and people want to have a trust level and a confidence in what they're buying. I mean, statistically, all the reading I've done or anything that I've been involved in, we're really trying to alleviate the fears and improve the faith in the process. And so every little piece of whatever we do must support building the faith, reducing the fear in the process, because playing win-win for number one is doing that, because people are sometimes, I mean, I just had this happen just recently. I just told somebody, they were like, I'll pay you whatever you want. I know who you are. I know your experience in this industry. And I said, I'm not the right guy for you to do this, right? Because of these reasons. But I do know who the right people are. So I'm going to introduce you. Now, that was somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million a year to my company, but it wasn't the right thing for them,
Hmm.
right? So how do we play win-win no matter what it is? Because people remember playing win-win down to human-to-human communication. I mean, I backed into somebody's car one time and nobody was around, and I knew I damaged the car. Right. And I'm like, oh, geez, what do I do here? I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. I'm like, I'll put a note on the car. But what if they don't get the note? Right. This is
Hmm.
win-win. So I hung around, started writing the note. The person came out and I said, look, I backed into your car. I'm sorry, right? I will cover this 100%, whether it's insurance or I just pay for it out of pocket. The guy was stunned, right? Because I was in an area in a big city where people would hit somebody and then just take off, right? And so craziest thing happened. It was like $1,600 in damage. I paid it out of pocket, but his father called me. And this kid was about 19. He was driving a nice Tesla. That was another part of it.
So much behind that, first of all. We'll keep going.
Exactly. And I just didn't see it. I clipped the fender on the car and that was the end of it. And, but his father called me and he said, I want to thank you for having integrity and by playing, doing the right thing. And I said to him, well, he goes, I've always taught my children to do that. I said, well, I guess there's at least two of us in this world, right? Here's the point. I damaged the car. I paid for it. I played win-win. Now it turns out he's a very, very successful medical professional. And we've developed a relationship, which is leading to business, right? So it's playing win-win through the process will never hurt somebody. It will only enhance because now I've got a valued asset that I can go to and network through, which I never would have got, for unless I hit the kid's car, right? So it's how you take these problems and turn them into win-win plays. So everything has to be designed in the marketing or the whole customer journey on how to increase the buying confidence in the internal buyer and how to reduce the fear, not only in the buyer, but in the influencers and everyone who can be, touch that sale. In the case of the car, the father was part of the sale. I didn't realize that until after he called me, right? But that led me on to another thing. So, a lot of people don't like to play this way, Ryan, because it's a lot of work to set it up, right? And so they look at like top line and they'll just like, hey, we're doing okay. We're making money, et cetera, et cetera. And that's fine if that's the way they want to play it. But if you want to squeeze the profitability out and optimize the whole process, then we have to look at the whole customer journey and start tweaking the radio dials on each and every little segment of that process. And when we do, a lot of times like magic stuff happens. I had another conversation with somebody, over half of their sales team's not following up with any of their leads.
Well, and if they were leads, it sounds like those salespeople didn't generate those leads. Marketing probably did.
Marketing generated, exactly.
Well, I was going to say, I can guarantee you there's anybody that's outbound sales. You're working pretty darn hard to get those leads. But there's a couple of things there, Doug, that I want to highlight. The fact that, when you're talking about eliminating fear and building faith, it's a trust thing. And you mentioned the word trust. And David Horsager, he wrote The Trust Edge. He's a friend and he's been on the show a couple of times. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book, but like literally trust right now, like no one has it in any company, our government, you name the people. I mean, everybody's so skeptical, and business owners have been, so many times you buy a bill of goods, services or products, and it's not even close to what you think. So like, again, everybody's approaching the offers through fear, like you said. And so I think you tapped into something very interesting. And then when part of trust, there's Robert, is it Cialdini, who wrote the book Influence of Consistency, right? Consistency builds trust. And you talk about the customer journey. What's super interesting, this is leading to a question, is that given that foundation, Doug, finding salespeople that can represent your brand as a business owner and founder, represent your brand, who has that integrity, who stays consistent, who also gets up, likes to do the hard work, and follows up. The amount of people from the show are clients that can't find these type of people to go out there and decouple themselves from the sales process, or and maintain all of those things we just talked about. How the hell do people do
this? So here's the thing.
Are you laughing because it's hard?
No, well, I mean, it is hard if you don't know how to do it. And it's still hard when you know how to do it, right? But what I would tell everybody listening is, firstly, stop being in such a rush to hire somebody, hire the right person. Well, how do you do that? Because if you think about it, the cost of turnover in hiring a salesperson or sales manager or sales engineer is extremely high when you turn them over. So, a typical company that I would look at, I mean, they like, hey, I hired this guy, he was likable, or I hired this gal, she was likable, and they left in 3 months. Okay, what did that cost you? Well, they don't even think about that until you start monetizing. But then they hired another person for 3 months. They flushed out another person 3 months. A year later, they find the person that they want. And if they just had a process around this that gave them constant feedback, whether this person was right for the role or not, and it took them 4 or 5 months, that person's still with the company 2 years later and doing quite well. So one of the things that I tell people is we have to have a consistent, duplicatable process around hiring. For example, in interviews, the same questions need to be asked. I've sat in on so many interviews where they just ask different things because it's personality based, right?
I'm laughing because I'm a victim of that, man. I'm totally guilty.
But and Ryan, I used to as well, right? It's until you learn, like, oh wow, if you have consistency, you can measure this and benchmark it against something that you're really looking for, and and I like to use not a lot, but I like to use sales specific assessments as well when I'm doing this, right? Things that will measure sales personality, not just personality test, but will they measure the sales DNA of the person, right? Are they a true hunter, right? Because a lot of people will bring somebody in and they'll think they're a hunter and they can't hunt, but they might be better off in a customer service role or a farming type role where they're taking care of the client, right? And by the way, everybody listening, please write this down. All resumes are embellished upon. They're a bunch of lies. Okay,
especially if you're a salesperson, right?
They know how to persuade people. They know what to write in these things, right? So part of the process is to challenge what is in that resume and go right after it, right? So it just also we have to step back and say, okay, what role are we actually filling? Do we need somebody with a very high ego strength, which is not there's too high, which is arrogance, but they're confident in their ability, right? But do we also need somebody with a lot of empathy, has a good bedside manner? Because you can get a lot of people with high ego, who will just crush the conversation. But if that's not representative of how we want to play, then we don't want to be there. So there's a lot of factors, but it's really about coming down to having a measurable process around and systematic, right? That is duplicatable so that we can benchmark against what we want. Now, if we have people, which is even better, if you have a company that, you got, 8 people, 20 people doing great, well, we can benchmark that and profile that and then put it against the roles that we're looking for. That's, a lot easier because we go, okay, these people are, consistently 30% over, 50% over quota. Okay, this is kind of the profile we're looking for. Is this making sense?
Totally. And I think even a couple of comments too on the DNA too, like, yeah, hunter farmer, very typical, like filter on salespeople, but also like, if someone was a manufacturer's rep or like a channel sales rep, way different than a hunter, right? They're used to managing 5 big relationships and managing accounts versus going to market. And I think, so, and we can put a pin in this part and we can maybe loop back to it, Doug, of like, as far as like, how do you, how does your business model impact what type of people you need to hire? Because I think your business model and the size of the sale, the time duration of the sale, all are going to impact when and how the combination of hunter gatherer, all that kind of stuff, or hunter farmer impact. But before we do that, Doug, like, there's something that because I've been out of the process of hiring just constant salespeople, because we had 20 some salespeople, copier and manage IT and software sales reps. All of those those 3 services are all different with the type of solutions versus transactions versus, high quota and high commission versus, and low base versus high base and smaller variable. Like, are these people out there? Because I look at the clients and companies that I work with or in the peer groups or our clients, and it's like trying to find people that still have the ability to wake up, pick up the phone, and call people or like follow up. Like, where and how are these people out there? And and honestly, we don't have to get necessarily too far into the weeds of this, Doug, but like the pay too, like what should people expect for like a rock solid salesperson for base comp? It's just tough that people are, I think, because the reason I bring this all up is a lot of people, I get a lot of head nodding to systems, standardized process for hiring, but then they're like, well, where the hell are these people and how much do I got to pay them? And do they fit for my company and how long, like what's the process to going about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to one thing that you said. You can have a channel sales manager, and on their resume, it'll say, constantly, 200% above quota, right?
$2 million
right?
of sales each quarter, and
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like it's large numbers depending on the size of the company. I mean, if you're going for a job at a $28 billion company, probably not so as impressive. But so the real question comes down to, depending on what you're looking for, do they have, like you said, get up and want to do it every day, right? So there's a DNA characteristic called will to sell that can be measured, right? Do they actually have the will to sell? Are they going to go and somebody goes, they go, hey, I'm pitching, here's what we do. And the person goes, yeah, that's not really, hey, thanks so much. It was a real good time to talk with you. Next. And they move on, right? Now, there's a certain time for that in the particular model. But the reality is, if they don't have the will to sell, the will to close, if they don't know how to consultatively sell, then usually their closing skills are going to be bad, right? So it kind of follows all the way through. But all of this can be measured up front. And, I always tell people, they go, well, what should I do? I go, you simulate the working conditions before you hire them, before they ever get there, right? If they have to know how to present, take 10 or 12 slides, give them the slides, have them go into a room for 15 or 20 minutes, come back out and present to you. If they're award-winning Academy, sales actor of the year type of person, and you want that, great, they can present. But if they're boring the heck out of you, guess what they're going to do with your clientele or your potential buyers?
I know. It's almost such common sense sometimes. You're like, oh, like, duh, right? But there was an individual I interviewed, Joel, and I'll put the show link in the show notes, but he was talking about how to hire executives. We had this whole conversation. He brought up this example about a sales director, and literally, like he said, it's their ability to strategize about the future and predict it, and their ability to execute to get there. So he was talking about like having a salesperson come in and say, here's a strategy. I looked at your market. Here's kind of what I would do. And like literally part of the interview process, helping that person build that strategy about what they would do. What other tools are you seeing that, like, you said you can measure it? Are there tools that you guys like or that you've used in the past that are helping identify and match up these different scenarios?
Yeah, there's different types of tools. I mean, one of them is put out by what's called a company called Objective Management Group. I use their assessments a lot, right?
Okay.
Because they have done over 2 million assessments. So all the data is, from over 2 million actual salespeople, right? So it's very accurate and it's predictive. You got predictive validity with this particular one. So what happened? Here's the thing with assessments. There's thousands of them, right? Thousands of them. And a lot of them will go, hey, I took this, I use a disc profile or you name the one, right?
I'm an extrovert. Doug, you should hire me.
Exactly, right? So it's like, okay, it's nice you have that personality, but that doesn't make you successful in this role in sales. Right. And this is where a lot of people run into challenges, and they'll, Myers-Briggs, oh, I'm a whatever, and they'll spout it out. And it's like, okay, but does that fit the role of what we're trying to do? And especially, there's another thing about personality. What happens when they're under stress? Right? The personality can change. Right?
Yeah, dramatically.
They can go from a humanistic to a director immediately, right? Because they're trying to grab onto security and control. So there's all different ways of doing this, but I love that particular company and their assessments, and it's it's scientifically backed as well, right?
Does it have any kind of indication, Doug, on like emotional resiliency? Because I think what's super interesting is that and I don't know if it's just because of whether it was my age or the timeline of like my career of essentially jumping right into the family business that was under duress in the financial crisis to pulling it out from it, and in the sales organization. Man, I grew up literally drowning in a suit selling copiers. And like people are like, well, what's one of the best things you've ever done in your career? I'm like, sales. I got a PhD, Brian Tracy, Jeffrey Gittimore, and all this like
Yeah.
PhD in psychology because I got told how bad I sucked every day of my life. The 5% that said they liked me, they gave me checks, thank God, and got me hooked. But this emotional resiliency is so hard, especially with all the stuff going on today. How do you identify that in the salesperson? Because that's, like you said, the willingness to sell and the emotional objections you get all the time.
Right.
I think it's difficult for non-sales people to identify that quality in people.
And I agree with you. So again, you can assess that through assessments, but you can also assess that through questions. So, for example, when I was Chet Holmes, independent president of training and sales, right? I don't know if you know who Chet is. He wrote a book called The Ultimate Sales Machine.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I love it.
So we used to do something called recruiting superstars, right? I mean, and in one part of the interview, no matter where you were, you challenge this person. So it depends. What we were looking for, in the beginning, especially somebody who could, in a very short period of time, get somebody to take a credit card out from a radio ad, right? That's what we were.
So interesting.
So what we used to do all the time is they would come in, they give the resume, we attack the resume, we do all that stuff. We first would put a process together that they had to, go to a website, read all the information. And, we asked questions off that. So immediately, if they can't pay attention to detail, we knew that off the website. It's like, XYZ. I don't know. Right. All right. Next, you're done. Right. Because you're going to be dealing with CEOs and, privately held business owners. They're going to expect that. So when we would run them through, we would go through the interview, and no matter how well we wanted to hire them, we would always ask this question. We would always make the statement first and then ask the question. It would be, hey, Ryan, you know what? I really like a lot of things about our conversation, but I don't know. I've only got a few positions here, and I'm just questioning. I'm not really hearing you're a real sales superstar. I'm hearing you kind of were in sales. I'm just not hearing superstar. And we would be quiet and listen.
I love it.
Right? And here's the thing. You would be shocked how many people come in with a most embellished resume, did a great, a great interview, got through the second interview, and at that second interview go, oh, okay, thank you. They're done.
Like the one thing that you're giving them pushback is on their own skill set from the number one thing that's their career, and they just accepted that at face value.
Right.
So crazy.
so the thing is here's what I want everybody to please understand. If they do it then, they will definitely do it in the field. I was shadowing a real estate company asked me to, shadow their people, right? So I shadowed, and it blew my mind. This lady and a man came into a home. The house was over $4 million. So, you figure 6% commission on $4 million is not a bad day. Right? And they, the woman was going to the husband, I really want this house. I love this. Honey, look, the kids will be over here. Imagine them playing at Christmas time here, doing all of this. And he kept going, yeah, I don't know. It's a little more than I want to go. And she was like, yeah, but look, we got the pool out back. We've got this, we've got that. And he's like, yeah, sweets, but I don't know, it's a lot for us to take on. I mean, we can do it, but I don't, and they were going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And no kidding, the real estate agent, they go, okay, I think we're really considering doing this. And the real estate agent said this, Ryan. She goes, this is a really big decision. It's a life-altering, life-changing decision. And you don't seem to be 100% there yet. So why don't you think it over and get back to me? And I'm like, if I could have kicked her, I would have, right? But that would be violent, so I don't do that. But right? But here's the rub of the story. They did not buy that house, but they did buy another house in the similar neighborhood, and they paid over $5 million for the house. So she would have had her commission, right? But because she had so much empathy and she didn't have the ability to, the will to close, that she used what we call buyer's bias, which is also something that can be measured, right? We like to buy and we like to sell how we buy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you nailed that. Yeah. I think
right?
a lot of people can resonate with that.
Yeah. So in her case, she was a think it over person. So she let him think it over. And little did she know, they had other realtors they were talking with, and the other realtor brought them into the same community, and bam, right? So the reality is that all of this can be measured and it can be quantified, especially if we have a systematic process for doing it. And you could save yourself a ton of time in the long run, especially once you have the system set up. And I know a lot of people probably saying, well, what's the system, right? Well, that's a longer conversation than we could probably have on this podcast.
You want to give like the big overview of the system?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, what are we exactly looking for? One of the challenges a lot of companies have in sales in general is, what's the right fit client? They never define it.
Yeah, they never define their client. So how are you going to figure out what kind of salesperson or comp plan or all that stuff that you need to sell to that client that you're not sure of?
Exactly. So once we understand that, now how do we build the system off of what is the right fit client? Can these people actually go and get or close on right fit clients? So you start right in the beginning of that thing. And I always like kind of a screening interview type process in the beginning. And the whole purpose of the screening interview is so you don't have to interview them. So you want to set up the barriers along the way. See, top producers love barriers. They love them, right? Because the bigger the challenge, a true top producer, knowing the opportunities there, will basically claw through iron doors to get to that place, right? So that they will actually, be able to achieve the sale. I never realized growing up, but I am a top producer, and I've been that way in every company. And even when I ran teams, I would still sell. I had 166 people reporting to me, when I did the thing for Tony Robbins and others, and I would outsell all of them. I would not let them beat me no matter what. Now you might say, well, that's egotistical, but I always thought of it as win-win, because I always thought, listen, if I'm the head of the division and I'm breaking quota, and somebody comes and whines to me about, hey, this is too hard or this is that, I can always go back to them and say, well, how with managing 166 people am I able to do it and you're not? Let's talk about it, right? I had more credibility that way.
So on the specific point, because I love this point, Doug, is that I've had this other gentleman that grew up in the sales world. He's got a sales consulting firm too, and him and I talked about this whole the challenge of companies where they hire the top producer to then become the manager. And I that was me. So in my 20s, early 20s, I was selling a lot of gear, and then all of a sudden I'm manager. I'm like, so here was my management technique. And again, caveat, this was 14 years ago. It was hey, Doug, why don't you just wake up and do what I did? That was essentially my coaching. I was not polished on the coaching front yet. But so there's this whole challenge of the manager not necessarily having the leadership capabilities because they were the top producer, or the flip flop of that is someone that's the coach who's never done it, and then the top producer goes, hey, dog, you've never even picked up a damn phone yourself. So how are you gonna? I got no respect for you. So how do you deal with that situation?
So it's interesting because there's a parallel in the military. When I was in the military, right? If you're an enlisted person and you become an officer, you understand what the enlisted person's going through. But if you just became an officer out of college, you don't understand what the enlisted person, right? So it's a very similar state. So, here's the reality. There's an old joke in the world of business, which is, if you want to ruin two positions, hire your top producer and make them a manager.
I like it.
Right? Now, there's a lot of truth to that, but there's also people, like myself, who can do both, right? Mm-hmm. Here's the thing, though. I had to learn to be a manager.
Right.
Just like you were saying, you come in, you're like, oh, just do what I'm doing. I
wake up early, pick up the phone. Yeah, exactly. Wait a second. Oh, there's other things at play here.
Yeah. What's your issue? I don't understand. Right. That type of thing. Right. So, and truly, when you're a top producer like that, you don't understand, and so there's a lot of factors that go into it. But here's the thing: a manager's profile and a top producer's profile are usually very different. And a top producer loves to get out and sell. They love people. They want to get out there. You give them a spreadsheet, they will want to jump out the 14th floor window. They don't like it, right? Their brain goes, zzz, right? In the whole process because, and that's me. Like you give me, hey, create some pivot tables. No. Right? No.
Unless
right?
it's for my comp plan and for my quarterly bonus on how I can get more, then maybe I'll struggle through it.
But I will outsource that. I won't do it myself, right?
Yeah.
Now, you give that same thing to a manager, and they love doing that stuff. They love looking at the data. You give that to a sales engineer, they're just going to be, usually thrilled, right? Because it's all the methodical stuff that they like to go through. So when somebody's hiring for a specific purpose, we have to understand what that specific purpose is in that specific role, and then understand, do they actually fit there? And again, you can assess these things. A manager's assessment will be different. Even it's no different than if you're the CEO of the company, and usually, not always, you were the best salesperson in the company, right? Because you had that belief system and that will to make it work, right? So, you asked the question earlier, I thought it was a great question. Is okay, where are these people? Where do I find them, right? Are they out there, right? And the answer is yes. Where do you find them? Many times not in the traditional places that people look. So, we've hired, because we wanted people who had a very high ego state, a very high confidence. So we've hired people who were like bungee jumpers.
I love it.
Right?
I mean, like, yeah, you just, what's your fear? Definitely not of the person that's on the other end of that phone. They just jumped off a plane over the weekend or jumped off a bridge.
Exactly. So, people who jump off bridges are usually one of two profiles, either absolutely, crazy, or they have high confidence. Really, when it comes down to high self-worth and high confidence, right? Bungee jumpers, base jumpers, like a lot of people won't think like this, but the reality is here's the thing with a top producer too, you have to have a great training system and a great sales onboarding system, not just an onboarding system from HR. They expect it. So, if you put those pieces into your company and you have a great sales system that gets them up and being able to make money quickly, as quick as possible, or you reference back, how do you, the compensation, right? Sometimes if you have a long sales cycle, you have to compensate them. But anybody who's a true salesperson and a true producer wants commission. They want the highest commission they can possibly get, because they know that is leverage for them. That is the working leverage that a salesperson's looking for. When you can go in and make a year's worth of salary in 1 week or 1 day doing it the right way, and then duplicate that over and over and over again, man, that's a true salesman's, or salesperson's. Yeah. Right.
Well, so it's so interesting, Doug, too, because like you're so right. And like, because I've had so many of these conversations, as I'm sure you have, of like, well, the salesperson wants a 85% base and then 10 to 20% variable. And I'm sitting there going, okay, well, that makes sense. Like you said, if you have a 2-year sales cycle of like, a $2 million SAP implementation, I'm just making something up, where there's 17 stakeholders, your committees after committees and RFPs or whatever. Like, I understand the need to like have a non-recoverable draw or something like that to get the person to be able to pay their bills. But like, when I got the taste of making 6 figures selling copiers when I was 22, and I was like, wait a second, all I have to do is wake up, work harder, and I make more money. Like, you don't want anybody to ever take that away from you. And so, like you said, I've watched people in the moment that they increase the variable comp and reduce the base, they freak people out. And it's like, well, like the person just showed you their colors. Finding the people though that like myself back then, or like the true salespeople, the top producers, where that's inherent in them. How do you identify that? And then how are you like maybe for the words for the founders, being okay with the salesperson is the highest paid person in the company, because you own the assets, right? The company is owned by the owner. So it's okay to have someone's income higher than yours. So how do you find You're laughing because I'm assuming this is the same dialogue you have.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. I remember one time I was the greatest job in the world when I was going to college. I was selling music equipment, and I was selling it to the bands that I grew up listening to. Aerosmith, the
That's
Eagles,
awesome.
Billy Joel. Those. So I was actually hanging out with Boston and Extreme and all these guys, right? And I'd get up, go to school, get to work, sell music equipment all night, go out and play and party all night long, and then do my homework, right? It was an awesome job. But I remember the owner coming to me one day and he goes, "You're making more than I am." And I'm like, "What?" Because I was just doing my thing, right? He's like, "You're the number one salesperson in this company. You're making more money than I am. How sad is that?" Now, here's the thing. I really respected this guy as a business owner, but when he said that, it didn't sit well with me because I was thinking, how much more money are you making because what I'm doing, right? Now, the reality is we should be saying, I want every one of my salespeople making $2 million a year, right? Because if they're on high commission and they're making $2 million a year, that means the company is making X off of their production, right? And so, we had 30 of those, and my gosh, look, we got the ultimate leverage going on. So, in that division. So the answer to your question is through questioning, skilled questioning, and through assessing and running them through the model of what they're going to go through in the first place. Now, I will tell everybody exactly what you said, but you stated it a little differently. A top producer like yourself gets up every single day and says, I got to go do this. Now, we all have our days where it's like, oh, yeah. I remember one day, I have two daughters, and when they were both really little, one, I heard them, in their room one night, and I hear, and I'm like, oh no, right? And I go pick one of them up, and they throw up all over me, and then the other one's doing the same thing, and then all over the bed, and we're up all night long, right? I mean, yeah, I wasn't the most chipper person in the morning, right? Because I had slept maybe an hour and 40 minutes or something like that, right? So you're always going to have those days. But the reality is that a top producer is got two things. One, always desiring to get up and do something. And two, never being satisfied with their current level of production. They're not, and I had a person call me, and they were saying, listen, I'm going to fire my whole sales team. I said, why? They go, I calculated they're working 20 hours a week and they're not going out after any new business. I said, well, what's the problem? Are they hitting quota? He goes, yeah, they're doing what I want them to do. I want them to do better. And I said, well, what are they making? He goes, well, they're averaging 175,000 a piece. I said, so let me get this straight. 20 hours a week, 175,000. You're in a community where you can buy a house for $150,000. I said, did you ever think that maybe they're at the saturation point? He goes, yeah, well, no, but I want to fire them all, right? And I said, maybe you should hire some top producers to come in there who are making $400,000 a year, right? And then you can see if that will bring them up. Because right now, my guess is, without assessing it, is
equilibrium
hit, right? They're not top producers. A top producer, when they hit 175,000, goes, man, I can make 400 next year, and if I can make 400 next year, and we could play games like go out and take the whole team and have them buy expensive homes and really nice cars and, all that stuff. And now they're in debt and they go, oh yeah, I got to make more money. But the reality is that a top producer is not satisfied at 20 hours a week at $175,000. A top producer who wants to retire might be at that position, right? Where they just want some extra money. So, a guy like yourself is just going to keep driving and driving and driving. And it's not a choice, Ryan, right? You couldn't wake up in the morning and not feel that.
You can't just wake up and be different. Like you said, it's not whether it's in debt or not in debt, because that just makes someone super crabby and stressed versus like the intrinsic motivation of waking up and going, I can't wait it's the thrill of the hunt and the satisfaction when the commission comes in and job well done. And you're so right, Doug. And I know we're getting close on time here, but super important question that I have for a lot of founders that And again, this is mid-market companies, a couple $1 million to even 40, $50 million companies where the sales leadership function has not been eradicated or extracted from the owner
Right.
into a department that has the same level of care, trust, willingness to sell, all that. With your experience, because like you said, you've worked in the Tony Robbins world and then Chet's world and all these systems and like highly scalable consulting firms or other B2B firms. What do you see that is successful, that separation when it happens, and like anything that you can speak to on this topic?
So you're asking what happens when the actual leadership skills are transferred toward
Yeah, well,
the
anything
sales
like
team?
what makes that successful? You know what I mean? Like what when that happens and like the owners were able to go, hey, Doug's got the same level of integrity, willingness to sell, emotional resilience. Like is it just all those things? That's the process, or is there other factors other than what we've talked about that helps facilitate that getting to the next stage of being able to scale the business outside of essentially just the owner doing a lot and maybe having some sales assistants to like having an
Right.
actual professional department?
Well, they'll never scale that model. It'll hit a plateau, and then as you said, more stress will kick in, right? So, look, leadership from the top has to be driven down through the whole organization. And a lot of times when the leader is the highest performer in the company, they have reluctance to actually offload some of that to other people because they want to stay safe. It's their baby. They built it, right? And who's going to take care of it like they are? Well, here's the kind of the sad truth. A lot of times, because where the company's grown, you're not supposed to be there anywhere away, and there are other people who will do a much better job than the
So true.
leader of that company, right? So when they can start doing that, that starts to free them up. I mean, the leader of the company, they would still want to be the leader of the company. Great, let's go whale hunting, right?
Yeah.
Let's go big accounts, because that'll get you to grow at 5x versus market rate plus 20% or whatever, right? So there's a job role specification that has to change. But a lot of times, and I know I've been guilty of this too. It's like, no one has my level of expertise in this regard. So, I can't just outsource this. I can't just bring somebody in and
And it's probably even more complicated, Doug, in professional services, or I think about like the consulting firms that you've consulted with and worked with.
yeah,
Like when you are also the product and the salesperson, and
yes.
when you're out selling, you can like pull from your, knowledge and experience immediately in real time.
Well, the key around this is creating systems so that the leader can actually extract out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Chet Holmes passed away, but the past 2 years prior to him being diagnosed with what he had that, took him out in the third year, he pretty much just lived on his boat and collected millions of dollars, right? Not because he's, didn't want to, run the company. He was just running it in a different way. He had very competent people and highly defined systems that we had all built together, right? So that's the key, to get those systems built. And then you can backfill with people. People are, and a lot of times people go, well, systems trump people. No, they're equal to it, right? I mean, because, no system in the world except maybe the human system, or circulatory or brain function or whatever, works without the human being. But I mean, the human being can do something to stop that, too. So people have to be, but I will say this about that. A lot of times guys like yourself or guys like or me, top performers, whether they're in sales roles or in leadership roles of management, one thing that the ownership must get used to is they're going to be mavericks. So they're going to create some disruption in the process, whether they want it to or not. And so we got to make a little bit of space and room for that, because that's where the brilliance comes out a lot of times, and they find new, product sets and things like that. I mean, I remember when I was in a sales position for a company, there were 315 salespeople. I was number one guy in that company, selling, but I created product sets that they didn't even have and sold them. right?
Right. Hey,
I,
do you want some margin on this new product that we need to sell? I got a yes.
I remember a sales engineer screaming my name and not in a very nice language pattern coming down the hallway gets to my cubicle and he goes, "What the heck did you do?" Because I went out and I sold some high profile accounts, 6 of them actually, this product set. And I said, "Well, we can technically do that." He goes, "Yes, we can, but we don't have any way of, productizing it." I said, "Oh, well." And he said, "Well, I'm going to go talk to your supervisor and the vice president." I said, "Okay, I get it." They did. And they go, "Well, that's pretty brilliant, right?" And so they talked to the CEO of the company. The CEO calls me. He goes, "Do me a favor, will you? If you ever come across something like this, run it up to me first." Now here the rub of that story is they sold tens of millions of dollars of that new product set, in the first year. So make room for the Mavericks. And again, how do you know they're a Maverick? You can assess this up front.
I love it. So, Doug, I know we're short. We're wrapping up here, so I'll ask my last couple questions. So, best place to get in touch with you. So, first, the last question. I'm going the inverse now, but the best place to find you, more about your company. How do people engage with you?
Yeah, they can just email me at doug@businesssuccessfactors.com. My LinkedIn is Doug Brown 1234. They can call me directly at 603-595-0303. And yeah, I mean, those are probably the easiest ways to get a hold of me. I do have 2 people who keep my calendar, but I know when something comes in because they tell me. So, if somebody wants to have a discussion or whatever, please reach out.
That's awesome, Doug. And then the last question is, the name of the show is Intentional Growth, and I love hearing what the word intentional means to them. So, what does it mean to you?
Intentional means that you have a purpose and a direct purpose for a desired outcome. And you follow that and put one foot in front of the other every single day and keep your nose pointed in that direction, and you will get there eventually.
That's awesome, Doug. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome, Ryan. I really appreciate having me on here and the questions that were asked.